I'm extremely excited to have so many people here today to join me for this talk on the differences in the media reporting of the earthquake. I understand everyone here tonight speaks English incredibly well. Unfortunately, I only speak Australian, so if you have any trouble understanding me, please put up your hand and I'll try and get someone to translate. Let's just go through this. Okay, first of all, I'd just like to ask you your opinion. What I'm going to try and do today is put you in the seats of both sides of the equation. When we talk about the media, there are always two sides. There's the journalists who are reporting, and there's the people who are providing the information for the journalists to report. And so what I'd like to do today is try and get you to imagine both sides of that dynamic so that we can try and come to some sort of conclusion as to what went wrong and how it could have been done better. At the end of this, Yoshinori-san said we're going to have a fun exercise. So you're all going to take off your shoes and jackets and we're going to do calisthenics. No, I don't do calisthenics, as you can see. What we're going to do is we're going to ask for volunteers from the audience to be Prime Minister Kan and to be Chief Cabinet Secretary Edano at a press conference. And we will see how you perform as the speakers in front of the media. So that will be something very fun we'll do at the end. But first of all, I'd just like to get an idea of what your score is of how people acted during this very, very, very devastating disaster. First of all, the foreign media. How many people think that the foreign media, the non-Japanese media, did a good job of reporting on the earthquake? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thanks. How many people think they did a bad job? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, about double the amount. Why do you think they did a bad job? What makes you?
Very sensationalist.
Very sensationalist.
Headline chasing.
Headline chasing. Inaccurate reports. The shock factor. The shock factor. Right, right. Someone who said that they did a good job. Why do you think they did a good job? What was?
I thought they did some investigative.
Yeah.
Facts that would have not
Good.
come out anyway.
Good. Good. Okay. What about the local media, the Japanese media? How does everyone feel about the Japanese media? Did the Japanese media do a good job generally? Anyone think they did a good job? No, no one. Yes, you did? Yeah, yeah. I thought they did a pretty good job. They did a pretty hard job. Who thought they did a bad job? Or are we neutral on this? Bad job. Why? Yeah.
Well, they keep doing.
Sure.
For example, like after the 1 month or so,
Yeah.
they still keep just showing the.
Yep. Yeah.
And then all the spinning, we have
Yep.
and then like all the media doing almost the same thing.
Right.
Makes me a little bit bored.
Yeah. AC. We have in our company a young guy called Daisuke Tomita. And Daisuke Tomita is either, he's 31 years old? 31 years old. He is either the luckiest man on earth or the unluckiest man on earth. Because when he was young, he experienced the Kobe earthquake. He lived in Kobe. Then he got a job with Kyodo News and he was transferred to Niigata, where he experienced the Chuetsu earthquake. And then he joined us in Tokyo, where he's just experienced this earthquake. So either he's very lucky because he's got some sort of atariguse, or he's very unlucky. But we used his knowledge and plotted out whether there are any similarities in what we call the media cycle, how the story progresses. And the cycle was exactly the same each time. For the first month, the cycle was all about what happened. Continuous footage of the disaster situation, continuous footage of those things of the tsunami coming through, daily reporting on exactly how bad this disaster was. And in each case, it was for about a month. After about a month, you're getting bored, but the media's getting bored too. And so the media start to look for a different angle. And the angle after the first month, when we get into the second month, in each case, was what went wrong. Who made mistakes? Which local governments performed well? And do you remember that there were a lot of stories about one town who had spent a lot of money building a very high wall against the tsunami, and another town who only had a very low wall? And so there was a lot of reporting about what happened there. Okay. Overlaying that, we get the hero stories. Man survives under house for 2 weeks with no water. The one I love is the dog that was on the roof floating in the ocean for 2 weeks. So you get those hero stories going through. That lasts for about 2 months. So we're at just over that period now. And now we start to go into what we call the reconstruction, the rebuilding reporting. And we're seeing more and more reporting coming out. Now, in each case, this cycle was very much the same. So in one way, there's a dynamic that the media must be reporting those things because everyone else is reporting them. And that runs that cycle. The other side to the equation is the media only report on information that's available. They don't make it up. So was there a way, was that the only information that was available, the only story that was out there? And we'll talk about a little bit about that later. But certainly, the Japanese media was very different from the foreign media. The foreign media was very speculative, very sensational. And then as we started moving through that news cycle and got to the stage of rebuilding, what happened? Libya, Osama bin Laden. And suddenly, Japan's forgotten. So the media is now not following the Japan story. So when they report on Japan overseas, they're still showing the disaster story or the hero stories. They're not moving on to the rebuilding stories. Okay, so there's a little bit of a different dynamic there between the foreign media and the local media. What about the government? Who thinks that Kan-san and Edano-san and everyone else in the government did a good job? No one? Today, there was a survey put out that said that 70% of people would like to change the Prime Minister. That means that there's 30% who don't think he should be changed, but we don't have 30% here who think that he did a good job. He didn't do a good job? Yeah? Yeah? What do you think should have been the message that the government was sending out? Anyone like to have a go? What was the main, yeah? Worst case scenario, okay? Worst case scenario. Anyone else? I wanted the government to say this, yeah? And I think those stories we might begin to see if the government gets their act together, because we're at that rebuilding stage in the news cycle at the moment. But I think in the initial days, what we wanted was reassurance. We wanted to know the worst case scenario. We wanted to know how we should be acting. We wanted some sort of consistency. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. What about TEPCO? Why are you all laughing? Who thinks TEPCO did a good job? Okay, I'm not even going to ask you why you think they did a bad job. Do you think they could have done a better job? Does anyone think they could have done a better job? You know, TEPCO made some really, really fundamental mistakes in the way they communicated this. And we'll talk about those a little bit later as well. And then I guess the Nuclear Safety Commission was very much the same as TEPCO. But I think what we need to look from here is that the last three people on this slide, the national government, TEPCO, and the Nuclear Safety Commission were the main actors in this disaster, and the foreign media and the local media were the main reporters. So what we want to try and do today is get you to be able to see both sides of what was going on. Okay, the earthquake happens on March the 11th, a very sad day. What's the first thing that happened on the weekend? Thousands of journalists from all around the world came to Tokyo. The CNN office in Tokyo normally has 4 people. It's a very sleepy office. On the 12th of March, on the evening, they had 18 people, all flown in from overseas. Journalists from every country in the world came to Tokyo. Why do you think they came to Tokyo? Because it's the biggest story on the earth at the moment, right? So you've got all these journalists coming to Tokyo, and what's the job of journalists? To report. And what were they coming to report on? The disaster. The disaster, exactly, the disaster. And so they all come to Tokyo, and what was the first thing the government did on Saturday night? Do you remember? It was a very good move, I think. They closed down access to disaster areas, except for essential personnel. Okay? So you've got thousands of reporters all coming to Tokyo, spending a lot of money to get here, staying in nice hotels in Tokyo to report on the disaster. Where's the disaster? What are they going to report on? They're stuck in Tokyo. I had so many calls from reporters over that period asking me, could I introduce them to a building that had collapsed in Tokyo? I live in Kudanshita, and the Kaikan, of course, the roof fell down, but you can't see it from the outside. So that didn't. Some of them got in a taxi and went to Yokota Base by taxi from the Intercontinental Hotel in Tokyo to film a US Army group getting off the plane. They had nothing to report. Their job is to report the disaster, and they had nothing to report. So what do you do? What do you do? You report the same thing over and over again. And here they all are watching Japanese TV, and they can't understand it. They're not being invited to press conferences. So they're all sitting there very, very frustrated. I got interviewed by an Australian media, the Australian media. And we were sitting there, and I was interviewed in the hotel, and they said, tell me what it was like for you at the earthquake. And I said, well, the room started shaking, and we were having a meeting with a client. And when it started shaking quite violently, we all got under the table. And I said to everyone, get under your desks. And he said to me, and I suppose at that time there was a lot of screaming and panic in your office. And I said, no, the Japanese are actually quite calm, and everyone just got under their desks and waited till it passed. I didn't get on the news that night. I rang up my mum and dad and said, hey, Mum, I'm going to be on the news tonight. And I wasn't on the news because that's not news. It's not news that there's no screaming and panicking, right? So the foreign media are all sitting there very frustrated, trying to write something news. And what happens on Sunday? A nuclear reactor blows up. And a nuclear reactor blowing up, you can't see radiation. It's a great story, suddenly. So, what do we see? How the media sensationalized this because they didn't really have too much to talk about. And when the tsunami, you didn't come out in the video there, but when the tsunami, that huge tsunami that was about this high, was coming up the canal, there's a scene there where the guy goes, "It's amazing, the tsunami is coming up, the river's flowing backwards." And there was a sensation, there was this woman saying, "Oh, it's so dreadful, it's so dreadful." It's great sensationalization because of another dynamic which we'll talk about a little bit later. The worst piece of reporting was, I thought, this, where Fox News, which is a major news organization that you would expect to check their facts, put up a map of all the nuclear reactors in Japan. Shibuya Eggman. Seems like a funny name for a nuclear reactor. Turns out it's a very popular club in Shibuya. I mean, this is just inexcusable for the foreign media. This is just basic lack of fact-checking. And I think there are some things that we need to say that the foreign media were in a difficult situation, that they didn't have anything to report on. They needed to be going out there and giving stories. But there are other things like this which were very deliberate or just basic failures in simple journalism and simple journalistic rules. Where did the Japanese go for their news? The majority of Japanese went to NHK for their news. Okay? 80% of Japanese surveyed in an NIR survey, Nomura Research Survey, said that they found NHK to be the best source of news. Followed by portal sites. And these portal sites are portal sites like Google News and Yahoo News, but also for the internet news sites of the newspapers. And following that was newspapers. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us that people with news these days, consumers like you and me, consumers of news, want very quick news. They want it instantaneous. They want the quick fix, so to speak. And that is actually a characteristic of the news that we are seeing, that is a dynamic of journalism and what I do, PR, that has changed considerably over the past 3 years. You used to wait for the morning newspaper. No one waits for the morning newspaper anymore. People don't read the newspaper as a source of news. I've given you a copy of our Trust Barometer survey. You can see there that as sources of information, people these days go to the internet before they go to the newspaper. But then what they've looked at in the internet, they then reaffirm through the news. So the quick news fix is very, very important. And even in Japan, that is becoming very important. That's why we saw a great deal of popularity amongst the TV, and particularly NHK News. And credibility of NHK News increased by about 25%. So a lot of Japanese felt that their media was actually doing a very good job of reporting this. At least NHK was a good source of news. And I think what happened here, we talked a little bit about consistency before, we talked a little bit about the worst case scenario. I think we just had too much news in those days. The first month or so was just the disaster shots. But once we started getting after that, we had so many commentators talking about so many different things, we didn't know who to believe. And the default was NHK, I think. Finally, people would say, well, you need to listen to what's being said on NHK. So NHK was perceived as being a very, very credible source of information. And that's actually quite different to what we saw overseas, where the major TV news stations lost considerable credibility. CNN is supposed to be the most credible international news station in the world. It just completely lost all its credibility. Fox News, I mean, Fox News has its problems, but Fox News is the news service of a major US network. It lost its credibility. So this is another different dynamic that we're seeing between Japan and the Western news. Okay. So when we look at these different dynamics, how people didn't perform, what went wrong, I think there's 4 things that contributed to the way the media reported this. The first one is the lack of message control. The lack of message control. And message control can mean consistency of message. The second one was the failure to address the needs of the media. And this was particularly a failure on the part of the government vis-à-vis the foreign media. The third one is differences in communication culture. There are fundamental differences in the way the Japanese government communicates and the US government communicates. I noticed a laugh there, and that's not to say that the Japanese government communicates badly or the US, it's just they do it in a different way. And that contributed to the misunderstanding. And we've got this entertainment over news. No one wants to sit down and watch news anymore. It's boring and it's scary. People want to be entertained. And that's why you like to have screaming women about this tsunami. And people like to sensationalize the news. It's what I call the Chanoma effect. That, you know, everyone wants to feel nice and comfortable and entertained with the news. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So, okay. Lack of message control. Just to be clear, I notice you don't have a course in public relations here. You should. The difference between public relations and advertising. We are 2 very, very different animals. How many people read the newspaper this morning? Put your hand up if you read the newspaper this morning. Okay. Not many people read the newspaper, huh? Can you remember 3 advertisements from the newspaper this morning? Yeah. Can you remember 3 articles that you were interested in? Okay, it's late on a Friday night. I do this quite often. It's very rare that people can remember 3 advertisements. And yet, do you know how much a company pays for a 1-page ad in the Yomiuri newspaper? Almost $400,000. $4,000 yen. And no one remembers it. People generally only remember advertisements if it's something they're interested in. Women will generally remember advertisements about cosmetics, clothes. Men will generally remember advertisements about cars. It's just you remember what, so an advertisement doesn't give you any new information. What PR does, it gives you new information. We take the messages of our clients and package them in a way that journalists will write about them. So when you compare them to, in advertising, you have complete control of the message. Complete control of the message. You decide what goes in the ad. You know? Globus is the best M&A course in Japan. Okay? But it's Globus telling you that. What we do is get someone to package and get someone else to write about it. So a third party writing about it supposedly gives it more credibility. The top reporter at the Nikkei says Globus is the best MBA course in Japan. More credibility. But in exchange for that credibility, you lose control over the message. So what we work in is teaching our clients how to construct messages and how to control those messages in the best way possible with the media. And when we have Mr. Khan and Mr. Edenor sitting here later today, we're going to see how well you do at controlling the message. So, in communicating with the media, and there are 4 types of media, okay? There's paid media, earned media, owned media, and social media. Paid media is advertising. Complete control over the message. Earned media is what we do, what I do. Convince the journalist that this is a great story and that he should write about it. So you earn that media. Owned media is your own web page. Media that you own, your own web page, your own YouTube site, your own whatever. And social media is things like Facebook and Twitter, where you have a lot of people hopefully writing very good, nice things about you. But when we are dealing with the media as defined by newspapers, TV, radio, how you put the message out is very, very important. What makes news? What makes news? Anyone? There's about 4 or 5 common things that make news. What makes a good news story from a journalist's perspective? Imagine you're a journalist. What are you going to write? Yeah? Yeah? Why is that? Right. Okay. Good, good. Anyone else? Yeah? Disaster? Yeah, disaster's a good one. Anyone else? What about you? Take a guess, no wrong answers. Yeah? Scandals. Ooh, yeah. That happens in the news. Yes? Who won the Super Bowl? That's good news. That's good news. Anyone else? Anyone over here? What makes for news? Okay, let's look at it. Conflict. Conflict makes for great news. Why do journalists follow Kan-san and Tanigaki-san around every day? Conflict. Right? Conflict. Scandals are a little bit about conflict. 2 parties. So conflict is very good news. Conflict is very good news. Human interest. Human interest, how it impacts humans, is very good news. Consequence or significance. This is your famous person dying. Maybe significant for the world. Osama bin Laden being assassinated was significant for the world. Hopefully. Proximity. Proximity. And proximity can mean distance, or it can mean proximity in terms of impact. So for most people in the United States or Europe, the Great Eastern Kanto earthquake was not proximate. It was not close to them. It was not close to them. But it was big news. It was a human interest. It was a disaster. But when Libya popped up, that was more proximate. So they started reporting on Libya. And novelty. And by novelty, I don't mean sort of knick-knack novelty. I mean new. It's got to be new. News has got to be new, by definition. It can't be old news. So even while we were talking about the dynamic of those people reporting on the same things, they were actually trying to report on something different, even if it's only one little piece of news, different. And that's why sometimes you got very speculative and people moved away from the truth, because journalists work in a very competitive environment. They need to write something different from the guy next door to them. And so they're constantly searching, but there's not that much news out there. So what drives journalists? The desire to report something new. Every journalist wants to write a new story. A new story. Journalists love to get the scoop, right? They want to break the story. How many times have we seen the front page of the Nikkei newspaper report something that didn't happen? The famous one, I think, in recent history was the delisting from the Tokyo Stock Exchange of Nikko Cordial. A lot of investors sold shares on the basis of that report, and it didn't happen. So there's a desire to report something new, and sometimes with journalists, that overrides the factual base that they're looking at. They do like to report the truth, or what they think is the truth. But journalists are not God. They get the truth from the sources of information. And this is why it comes back to the message being important, consistency in the message being important, because the journalists get the information from the messages they're hearing. As I said, journalism is very competitive. Everyone wants to write a news story. I hope none of you will ever be in the position where you are being subjected to media reporting in a crisis or a scandal. The Japanese media are usually very otonashi. They don't jump up and down too much. They don't ask difficult questions too much. But if they perceive in a scandal that you are lying or giving incorrect information or not being transparent, then it's a feeding frenzy. Remember Yukijurushi. I haven't slept. Not the right message. But not only was that not the right message, it was not the right message after they had kept the reporters waiting 4 hours for the start of a press conference. So the reporters were already very angry. Toyota. The big Toyota scandal last year. American media, very, very critical of Toyota. 6 months before that happened, Akio Toyoda, the CEO, went to the United States. And in the United States, he held 3 press conferences. In those 3 press conferences, only the Japanese media were allowed to attend. This is a global company. The CEO is in the United States. How many cars do they sell? He had 3 press conferences, and only the Japanese media were allowed to attend. So how do you think the American media felt towards Toyota? Toyota was not letting them do their job. Their job is to report on the facts. Their job is to write a story about Toyota. And Toyota was saying, no, you're not allowed to come and hear a story. So when something happens with a Toyota car and you're a journalist, are you going to write something nice about Toyota? Are you going to believe them? Are you going to assume they're telling you the truth? No. So media relations and maintaining good relations with the media is something that's very important for you and all your companies. But in this particular dynamic with the earthquake, we had the consistency of message fell apart. Okay. The message must be convincing, it must be compelling, it must be clear, and it must be competitive. Why must it be competitive? Because the media are always trying to write a new story. So it has to be better than the last message. But it has to be consistent and it has to be compelling. And this is from our own research, it's in your pack. A message has to be heard 3 to 5 times through different channels for it to sink in. Just hearing a message once, the brain doesn't accept it. 3 to 5 times is most people in Japan. In the United Kingdom, it's almost 10 times people have to hear it. They're very untrusting in the United Kingdom, I think. So 3 to 5 times. Now let's take this back to Prime Minister Kan's very, very first press conference. Okay, we won't watch it all. I actually thought that Kansan did a pretty good job of this press conference. He was reassuring. He told us what was going on. He asked for people to be calm. He had 3 very, very clear messages. I think he really reassured the Japanese public in this particular press conference. What happened was, after that, the consistency in the messages began to fall apart. And obviously, it's very difficult to maintain consistency in message when there's so much going on. But part of it was due to the way that the Japanese government communicates. Different countries have different styles of communicating. There used to be a Prime Minister called Mr. Koizumi. And when he did the Yusei Senkyo, the company I was working with, PRAP, we did the media relations and the PR strategy for the election. And after that, he asked us to go to Washington, DC and learn about the way that the US government communicates. The US government is a huge organization, much larger than the Japanese government. When a new president is installed in the United States, he has his White House communication staff. Anyone seen the West Wing, that TV drama? Yeah, all about the White House communication staff. And the White House communication staff help shape his messages and decide what he's going to say, and they get it out to the media. But not only does he control the communication staff in the White House, but the White House sends a head of communications to every department. So the Department of Transport, the Department of whatever, they all have someone from the White House as head of their communications function. So what happens when the White House wants to get a message out? There's consistency. White House wants to announce a new policy, there's consistency. Because they can maintain consistency in all those messages. So the White House has a new energy policy, the White House announces the energy policy, the Department of Energy has a guy who is saying the same sort of thing. Consistency. Okay? What happens in Japan? There's one guy getting out the message, basically, Mr. Edano. He has, and even under normal circumstances, he has 2 press conferences a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. He's the chief cabinet secretary. He's got a country to run, or help to run. He shouldn't be doing press conferences. So when the media go to METI, there's no consistency. They hear a different message. When they go to the Zaimusho, they hear a different message. So as we went through this process, and more people became involved, and reporters started looking for a new story, going to Mr. Kaeda Bandi-san and saying, "What do you think?" He would say something different. Or he would say something very similar, but not the same. And then he would go to the Nuclear Power Commission and ask them, and they would say something very similar, but not the same. And all of us who were listening, we're sitting there saying, well, the government's saying this, but the Nuclear Safety Committee says this, and TEPCO is saying this, so they must all be lying, or someone must be lying. And what happens? You don't know who to believe. So the credibility of everyone goes down. So one of the main reasons why we had a big mess here was not because the Japanese government is incompetent. It's an infrastructure issue. They don't have the infrastructure to communicate. And that's not only in disasters like this, it's at all times. So that's the thing. Of course, other countries have a very different way of communicating. You either listen or you die. But every country has a different way of doing it. And one of the things that happened with the Japanese, one of the other things that the Japanese government does, in the United States, remember Katrina. When Katrina happened, FEMA, who is the the emergency department that's looking after it, had a whole range of experts come out and talk about it. They have experts, and the government always wheels out these experts. In the United Kingdom, when there's a big crisis or something, the government wheels out lots of experts. In Japan, where were the government experts? Did we see any government experts? In Japan, the process works differently. The government announces something, and then everyone switches on the TV, and there's experts all over the place. They're from Tokyo University, they're usually from Tokyo University, and they are very well credentialed people who are explaining what the government is telling you. So we would hear something about the nuclear reactor during a press conference from the government, and we'd switch on our TV, and there would be someone from Tokyo University giving us a very detailed explanation of exactly what was happening. So anyone who was watching the Japanese news regularly actually didn't feel too disturbed about this process because they were getting actually very good explanations about what was going on. But for foreign journalists who don't speak Japanese, all they were getting was the top-level comments from the government. And so they felt there was a vacuum of information and the Japanese government wasn't communicating enough. We met with the Prime Minister's office very recently and highlighted this to them. They need to make more of an effort on the infrastructure. It's not the message, it's the way you control the message through the infrastructure. And that will be something that Japan will have to address going forward, I think, in the way that they communicate this. I would like to show you this whole press conference, but it runs for 2 hours and 15 minutes. You never have a press conference that runs for 2 hours and 15 minutes. How do you maintain consistency of message? Reporters will run out of questions. You can see it. If you have a spare 2.5 hours, watch it. Because you will see at the beginning, for the first 20 or 30 minutes, reporters are asking very good questions. And TEPCO is giving some pretty good answers. After about 30 minutes, the reporters get bored, and so they start saying, well, what about the plug in the #1 reactor? I heard something about that. And the guy from TEPCO goes, oh, yeah, the plug. Yeah, on that one. And someone else gets, and so slowly it deteriorates. And you get reporters asking really, really sort of detailed questions that TEPCO is not really equipped to answer at that thing. And you've got the world watching them. The big difference in this crisis was the world's watching them. And the thing that really struck me was that when you look at the press conferences, they're all televised. TEPCO talked to the reporters in front of them. They weren't talking to all of us. They were talking to the reporters. And so it was like we were third parties and not even part of this. And it was our electricity that was going to be cut off. We were the ones who are going to be suffering from any side effects of radiation from Fukushima plant. But TEPCO was talking to the reporters. They failed to understand that the reporters are only a conduit to the people. And that was something that I think was, people actually saw how bad TEPCO were doing their press conferences. So, if you're ever in the same situation, no longer than an hour for a press conference. No longer. Prepare a statement, get your messages out there, and then questions and answers for about 30, 40 minutes, and then cut it off. The reporters won't like you cutting it off, but ultimately it's a better strategy than sitting there for 2.5 hours taking a beating. And you can have another press conference the following day. TEPCO was doing this every day. In the end, I think they just got really worn out, to tell you the truth. To tell you the truth. And so it deteriorated, and it made us feel very, very uneasy because the government, we had those little bit of changes, TEPCO was being beaten up. We just felt that they were very, TEPCO must be doing something wrong if the reporters are treating them like that. Another cultural difference. This is in the pack you've got. This is our trust barometer, and it asks who do you want to hear from in a crisis situation? And it's a company crisis is the blue, the middle is a product recall, and the third one is the community has been damaged. You've got this in your pack. But this one is the CEO. This is a third party, a technical expert, chairman, a regular employee, and a government official. What do you notice about this chart for Japan? In Japan, everyone wants to hear from the CEO. The CEO is the guy who's got to get the message out in all of these cases. When we look at other parts of the world, it's a very different story. In the United States, they want to hear from a third party. In the case of a product recall, they want to hear from a technical expert. If the community has been damaged, they want to hear from a third party. So there was this other dynamic, and this was also applicable to the Toyota crisis. There was no need for Toyoda-san to be the main spokesperson. He's a busy guy. He's in Japan. In the United States, they would have been very, very happy to hear from a technical expert and the CEO. So what he should have said was, his message should have been, we take this situation very seriously. I have appointed the head of my US operations to head up a team that will be looking into this, and we will give you regular technical updates, and they have a technical guy. But they fell into the cultural trap of being in Japan and saying the CEO has to be the guy that's out there. And TEPCO did the same thing. They felt this great need to have the CEO out there, and what happened, of course, the CEO stressed out and ended up, he got quite ill. But then they put out the chairman. They could have used a variety of experts, at least for the foreign media, not so much for the Japanese media. So there are cultural differences in who people want to hear from as well, that you need to be aware of in global situations. Okay, we're getting towards the end. As I said, no one wants to hear the news anymore. Everyone wants to hear entertainment. Yoshiko Sakurai she was the news anchor on Japan's first real news program, Kyou no Dekikoto. She did it for, 16 years or so. You look her up on Wikipedia and it says, Yoshiko Sakurai, journalist newscaster. We have another Sakurai. He's on a program called News Zero. And if you look on Wikipedia, it says, Sho Sakurai, Japanese idol, singer, songwriter, rapper, actor, and newscaster. That's probably why he's on a news program called News Zero, because there's zero news and all this entertainment. But this is something that's going on all over the world. People don't want straight news. They want to be entertained. And so there is an element of speculation and sensationalization that comes in to news all the time. And you have to be very, very conscious of how you get your messages to suppress that, which is very important. So demand for entertainment, not news, is something that was particularly overseas in the TV news. They wanted to be a little bit entertained. They want to be scared by the crisis in Japan. They want to be scared that a tsunami might hit California. They want to feel like it was a horror movie. But that is a real dynamic that is going on in the media. I'm not saying it's a good dynamic. I'm saying it's a very bad dynamic, but it is a true bad dynamic that's going on. Social media. Post-quake, 72 hours, usage of Twitter increased, and Facebook increased considerably. And I think any of you, I'm sure you're all here, the thing that amazed us most after the earthquake was the phones didn't work. Our mobile phones didn't work. We couldn't send emails to our family. My God. But Twitter and Facebook did work. And so they gained a lot of popularity. And you can see that in Japan, a lot of people used Facebook for finding out if their friends were okay and reconnecting with their friends. And Twitter they used as a source of information. Twitter is very interesting in Japan. In those materials I've given you, we have an analysis of the top 10 credible media that people go to for information. Okay? In Japan, Japan is the only country where Twitter features in the top 10 as a credible source of information. And I don't know why that is. I think it may have something to do with the fact that you can convey a lot more information in 140 Japanese characters than you can in 140 letters of the alphabet. So it has more of a role of conveying information. But Twitter, for some reason, in Japan, has become a very popular source of information, not just a way of sort of a personal journal type thing. And this is a little bit difficult to see, but the foreign media, there was so much bad reporting by the foreign media that a number of people started setting up social media sites to contradict it. And this one's a very interesting one called the Journalist Wall of Shame. And it has a list of articles and journalists and ranks them from, what was it? Sayaku, Akuma, this one's Satan, up. Go and have a look at it, just Journalist Wall of Shame. And it has the journalists named and it shows all their reporting and the bad reporting they did. And this was a way of trying to contradict all the bad reporting and the sensational reporting that was done by the foreign media. So in one way, a lot of the dynamics of the media contributed to the sensationalism, but in a sense, we were saved by the fact that social media allowed us to get a little bit more balance in what was going on. And I know the number of my Twitter followers increased because I was reporting on what the Japanese news was saying to people. Saying, you know, Professor such and such from Tokyo University says there is no meltdown. You know, such and such says that, and so I had a lot of people overseas following my Twitter just for that. So social media provided a very good balance for the sensationalism in the traditional media. Thank you all very much.